Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Happy Tuesday and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah, and I hope you had a wonderful weekend. As I said at the beginning of the last episode, it was supposed to rain all weekend, and it did, in fact, rain all weekend until I think Sunday afternoon-ish, late Sunday afternoon. Or maybe it doesn't matter. It was a glorious, wonderful, gloomy weekend. And while enough, too much of that can definitely lead to seasonal affective disorder, a weekend in the fall is just perfect. Just gorgeous and blanket worthy and long pants and snuggly clothes and a good book and some hot tea. I hope your weekend involved whatever kind of weather you like, but also involved good books, of course. As I said at the end of the last episode, I am speaking today with author Mary Keliikoa about her book, Denied. It is the second of her Kelly Pruitt mysteries, and I just find it fascinating that we've had 3 books in a row with female investigators, obviously investigating. Yes, I really did just try to say female investigators investigating crimes. But the one before, 2 before, Tracy Clark, that was a private investigator, and then there was an FBI agent in the last episode, and now we have another private investigator. And the one in the last interview with the FBI agent, that was the second of that Lisa Tanchik character. This is the second of the Kelly Pruitt character for Mary's books. And so, I don't know, I just, I like how even though things get scheduled way in advance, I'm always fascinated to see the patterns of the authors that I interview and the books that we're discussing. So let's actually talk more about this book. Again, it's called Denied, and here is the back. A high-risk pregnancy, a dangerous secret. When her case turns deadly, can this investigator avoid racking up a fatal debt? Despite her injuries, PI Kelly Pruitt is eager to get back to work. So when a mommy-to-be hires her to locate her estranged dad, Kelly is thankful for the straightforward missing persons case. But as she rummages through his trash in search of clues, she uncovers gambling debts to gangsters and a blood-soaked severed finger. With her investigation no longer cut and dried, Kelly's hunt takes a deadly turn when her quarry is found driven off a cliff to his doom. And she'll need more than her cop boyfriend's help to expose the truth when the mob sends her a cease and desist notice with an explosive ending. Can the determined detective take on the mafia and make it out alive? Now, when I think about mafia books, I don't necessarily think of the Pacific Northwest, but the mafia can be anywhere, right? So this does take place in the Pacific Northwest, in Oregon and Washington. And so that part was fun for me because I'm familiar with that area. Obviously, I grew up in Montana, so I love that it's a Pacific Northwest book. It's not so cut and dried as it says. I mean, there's a severed finger in the garbage can, not so far into the book, but this is the second, as I said, in this series, and I have not read the first one, but I had no problem reading this as a standalone. So you can jump in wherever you would like. If you want to read the first one, that would be awesome. If you want to start with this one, that's great. Although, if I wasn't reading it for the interview, I would have definitely read them in order because that's just how I like to do things. But I had no problem, even though there's lots of references to the first book, I had no problem feeling like I was confused or needing to have clarification. Obviously, I would like to read that first book just to get a better picture of the story because recaps are one thing in the second book, but the first book is going to contain a lot more details. So I will at some point go back and read that first one. Kelly, I think, is a fun character. She is a mom. She is divorced and they share custody. Her daughter is mostly with her ex-husband, but she lives next to her ex-mother-in-law, which makes for an interesting dynamic. Their daughter, not her and her mother-in-law, her and her ex-husband, their daughter is deaf, and so there is some signing, which I find kind of cool in that signing is such a visual language, and then to have a character in a book who is deaf, and then you have to write how those signs look, and I thought that was pretty cool. There's also a dog, and I'm a sucker for a dog. It's not a cozy, but there's a dog in this mystery, and his name is Floyd, and he's a basset hound, and I just want to give him scritches. He's fictional, I know, but if you can have fictional book boyfriends, I can have fictional book dog crushes, okay? Don't come at me. Anyway, Denied by Mary Keliikoa. I can't even talk now. The book is called Denied by Mary Keliikoa. Let's go ahead and turn now to the interview with Mary. Again, it's the second in her Kelly Pruitt mysteries.
Hi, Mary. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Sarah.
Thank you for being here, and we are here to talk about your new book in your Kelly Pruitt mystery series. It's called Denied. Before we get to the book, though, if you would please share a little bit about yourself, that would be wonderful.
Yeah. Well, I am a Pacific Northwest native, born and raised in Oregon, but I also travel to Hawaii quite often. I have been married for 32 years, and my husband is Hawaiian, so we get to visit his large family over there on the islands, which is a wonderful excuse to take off on a regular basis. I have 2 stepdaughters and 10 grandkids, and you can usually find me behind my computer writing stories, but when I'm not, I'm traveling. Well, I used to travel, but I'm hoping to get back to traveling more. And I took up gardening during COVID, and I've been enjoying that recently. So that's a little bit about me.
Wonderful. Yes, I was wondering about your last name, actually, because it does look very Hawaiian. Can you pronounce it for me so that I make sure I pronounce it correctly?
Yeah, it's Keliikoa. So in Hawaiian, all the vowels are always pronounced, but sometimes very quickly. So Keliikoa.
And I knew that I needed to pronounce the 2 I's, but in my head I couldn't quite make it work. So
most of the time I don't make it work. I just do it as one. It's just easier, right? It rolls off the tongue fast.
Yes. Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Sure.
So as I mentioned, this is the second book, the second Kelly Pruitt mystery. Can you give an overview so people have an idea of what the series itself is about?
Oh, sure. Well, Kelly Pruitt is a young, she's about 30 years old. She's a single mom to a deaf daughter, and she's inherited her father's agency after he dies of a stroke, and that's where the story starts in book 1. The series is as much about solving the individual cases that that come to her doorstep as it is Kelly's journey to becoming her own person. She's really, striving to get out from underneath her father's shadow, becoming her own PI. In fact, in book 1, she's a little on the fence about what that looks like because she is, co-parenting her deaf daughter with her ex-husband. And she lives next door to her ex-mother-in-law. So, there's going to be lots of fodder for for obstacles going on in that household. But she's also dealing with the issues around her mother dying at a young age. And, so that's kind of the premise of the whole series. And then each book, of course, sets out the new challenge that she's going to be facing.
Yeah, I love that she does live next door to her former mother-in-law. I mean, it's such a great picture of kind of a modern family, because modern families tend to look, like all sorts of things, and making
you bet.
Sometimes it can be a challenge. So I like that there's that diversity in there. How about the premise of the storyline of Denied?
Yeah, so in this particular novel, We start with Kelly, she's recovering from some of her injuries from book one, and she's stepping back into being a PI again, and in full force. And a former classmate comes to her, and her father is gone missing. And so Kelly's quest is to go find out what's happened. She thinks it's going to be as simple as, he's out drinking margaritas in Mexico and just forgot to turn on his telephone. That's not going to be the case, of course, or we wouldn't have a mystery on our hands. But that is the premise of the book. And of course, this is going to bring up a whole bunch of issues because Kelly does have dad issues. That's one of her things throughout the series. And this will be a way of her facing some of her own issues as she goes through. Finding out what has happened to her friend's father is going to make her face a bunch of things on her own.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now that you've got a little bit of a better idea of what the book and the series are about, let's go ahead and take our first break. When we come back, Mary will be talking about her inspiration for this installment of the series. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Golden State Media Concepts bring you the Bible Study Podcast. Reflect and journey the Bible as together we study God's Word and be inspired. Bible study made fun and informative for all ages. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Bible Study Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking with Mary Keliikoa about her second book in her Kelly Pruitt Mysteries. That book is called Denied. Let's go back to that interview.
And what was your inspiration for this particular chapter of the series?
Well, this particular chapter, the whole premise of the series, I wrote the book in 1999, and during that time I was in my mid-30s, and I was, facing a lot of challenges that Kelly gets to face. So that was kind of the inspiration of the book, the series in itself. And for Denied in particular, once I finished the first book and got it out into the world, I realized Kelly needs to be moving in the direction of healing her dad's stuff. And so that was what inspired me to come up with a classmate with a missing father. So I really wanted Kelly to be facing some of that so that we can grow her as a person all the way through the series.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And let's talk a little bit more about Kelly as the main character. You've mentioned a lot of different things about her. She's dealing with both of her parents' deaths. She has a deaf daughter. She's divorced, etc. But what do you think about Kelly will resonate with readers?
I just think that, Kelly is really in that place where a lot of women are in their lives. They're trying to balance motherhood and career, trying to find that sweet spot where they get to fulfill their own dreams and destiny and their own journey, but also being cognizant always that they are responsible for, another life that they're raising. And so, I think that will resonate and has resonated quite heavily with, women that are balancing that, because I think we're all trying, even those that have grown children, we're all still trying to balance, family and career. And I think that resonates. And I think Kelly has a lot of heart. She has a lot of great intentions, and she messes up every so often, or quite regularly, actually. And I think that is just the human quality about her, that there's not going to be a perfect way to do this. And sometimes it's just trial and error and, see what works and then trying to balance all those relationships and trying to keep them healthy. And, so I think those are all universal type things that I think that we all kind of deal with on a regular basis. And Kelly's definitely in full swing trying to learn them all.
Absolutely. when it comes to her daughter, Mitz, you did mention that Mitz was born deaf. Was that how did Mitz's character come about, and the fact that she's deaf?
Yeah. So when I was writing the first book, I was actually in a writer's critique group, and one of my friends in the group worked for the Washington School for the Deaf. And she would come in on a Monday, and we'd be chatting, and she would be telling us the stories, of the kids that she was working with regularly. And I just always had found that really fascinating work, and even as a kid, I could sign the alphabet, from like 7 years old. I could talk to you in sign, some form of sign language. I've always been really intrigued with it. So when I started creating a character for Kelly, I really wanted her child to be someone that she felt compelled to champion for. And one thing about Kelly and Mitz is that Kelly doesn't see her as limited, and that is part of Kelly's drive to continue to succeed, is to show Mitz that she can be or do anything she wants, that you don't have to be limited by what society believes. And so that was sort of the premise around creating that character, giving Kelly that inspiration to really champion being, your own person and not being defined by what somebody else might define as an obstacle or a limitation.
Mm-hmm. So I would imagine that there was some research around ASL and people who are deaf and how they communicate in a hearing world. What other types of research did you do for the book?
Well, this particular book, I had some fun. I got to go down to the Portland Meadows racetracks, which they have now demolished. So I made it just in time. They took it down last year, I believe it was. But I get to, head out to the racetracks and do some logistical type research, that type of where things are placed and how racetracks look, and the people, just a lot of people watching, right, of the different types of characters that visit. And then, of course, I have a police officer and a detective, and I have a family member who is a former homicide detective. So, a lot of research, just making sure I've got some of the procedural stuff right. And then I also just did some research on, heading out to different locations. Like Riverview in the book is actually a fictional location, but it's loosely based on a city that's about 30 miles north of where I live. And I chose to make it fictional so I had more creative license, but I did go up there for atmosphere and spent some time in different, areas trying to get the details correct. So, yeah, so, it's always kind of, and then Google, right? You're always Googling something. So, I'm always Googling or visiting a location. So, and I did quite a bit of that for this book.
Fun. Yeah, Google is amazing. I can't imagine being an author before Google. I mean, I know people did it and still there's plenty.
Isn't that the truth? I mean, how did we ever survive without Google? Right. I haven't figured that out. How did I ever write before?
Even just Google Maps, you can look at a place without having to go there if you can't make it there.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, Google Maps is wonderful.
Yeah. When it comes to your characters, what types of character development do you like to do before you're writing, and then how does that evolve as you're writing?
Usually I know the name of my character. I'm going to probably, I'm one of those terrible people. I don't outline, and I'm a total pantser, and the characters kind of come to me as I write. So sometimes I end up going backwards. So I start writing, the character kind of comes to me. For Kelly Pruitt, she came very formed. Like I knew who Kelly was even before I wrote the first word. Part of that was, I think, just that I really enjoyed Sue Grafton novels. And so I had an idea of a PI that I wanted to create based on some of the things that I really love to read. And so I wanted her different, but she came in very fully formed. I knew that she had, her daughter and her ex-mother-in-law and all that. But, there were certain characteristics that just kind of fine-tuned themselves as I continued to write, or that I changed even. Like in the original drafts, Kelly was a little bit more snarky. And that was something that I changed just through the different drafts. I softened her, and as I got to know her and what motivated her. And I think that's part of the writing process for me. So I don't do a lot of it up front other than knowing their name and maybe how they fit in the story, but who they are really comes to me on the page. I always say I think best with my fingers moving on the keyboard. So that's where they develop.
And do they ever surprise you as you're writing them?
Sometimes, yeah, they definitely surprise. Sometimes the actions they take, and sometimes people show up that I never even thought about. There'll be a new character that arrives, and I'll be like, oh, I guess they wanted to be part of this scene here for some reason. And thankfully, my subconscious must be thinking about this stuff, on a whole nother level all the time, because that appearance of new characters really surprises me. And yeah, sometimes my characters do surprise me in the way that they act or the direction that they go. And of course, in my brain, I'm always tightening the screws, and so I give them lots of opportunity to act out or to respond to the things I'm throwing at them. So.
How about autobiographical elements? Do you like to include, obviously location, since you're from the Pacific Northwest, but for instance, do you have the same peanut butter addiction that Kelly has?
I don't actually have the peanut butter addiction. My husband probably likes the peanut butter a whole lot more than I do personally. I would say that the issues, there's this kind of a thought process that we work through our own issues through our writing, of course, right? And even in fiction, of course, that can certainly happen. My father and I had a very strained relationship, so there's elements of that through the way that Kelly works through her stuff with her father. So I would say there's some autobiographical. At the time I started the series, I was, around the same age as Kelly, a little older, but, in that thing, and dealing with, I'm a step parent, so I was kind of just in a new parenting situation. So the parenting issues, the balancing of career, that was a little bit of autobiographical. I've noticed in other stuff that I'm writing, I don't see myself as much, but this particular series, I definitely see more of where I was in my life at the time.
Time for our second break of the podcast. Stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my interview about the book Denied. It is the second in the Kelly Pruitt mystery series, and the author is Mary Keliikoa. Let's return to the interview.
You mentioned that you started writing this series, or at least the character of Kelly, in 1999. How has it evolved? Because technology has evolved so much since then. So how has the story evolved as well?
Oh, definitely. So, I wrote it in 1999, and then I stopped writing almost completely from 2000 to 2015, 2016. My husband and I opened a company, and my creative energy went to that. So when I came back, I turned 50, and I came back into my writing, and I'm looking at the manuscript, and everything's changed. There was no Facebook, right? You didn't get to Google the way we Google now. The one thing that changed dramatically really was that technology side that PIs use in their everyday now to track things. So there was some of that, and just kind of bringing her thinking up. A 30-year-old today is different than a 30-year-old, 15 years ago, 16 years ago, just with the things that are happening in our environment. So, little things, I guess, but mostly the technological side was the biggest shift in the book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can imagine. And the fact that what you said, a 30-year-old today has a different relationship with technology than a 30-year-old 15 years. I would have been 30 about 15 years ago, and I'm thinking of 30-year-olds now and just the different things they grew up with that I did not. So.
Oh, I know. I mean, yeah, kids today come out, out of the womb practically, on Googling or, texting somebody. That was just not a thing for us, right? So,
right. Thank goodness.
So, yeah, so a totally different type of way of doing things, for sure. So, and it was a learning curve for me because I didn't grow up that way. So, you have to really kind of put yourself into that thinking.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. When you think about the series, do you have an overall arc in mind, or are you just going to write as long as you've got Kelly Pruitt stories to tell? How do you envision that?
Yeah, well, this particular arc so far is a 3-book arc, and that is what I was contracted to write for with my publisher, and so next year will be book 3 will come out in May 2022. I actually have been plotting, which I say I never outline, but I tend to write a back cover on my books, so I sort of understand where I want to go with the novel, and I've been playing around with one for a book 4. So I do have other series in my brain, and unrelated to Kelly, but I also want to continue with Kelly to some degree. She's going to be on pause a little bit after book 3, but I'm going to come back to her because I have other stories in mind.
You have other things that Kelly needs to take care of.
That's right. Yes, she has some more growth that she can do.
Right. So what are you working on now?
Right now, I am working on a standalone, which is completely different than what I've been working on before. It's a multiple point of view. So that's kind of what I'm working on right now. I also have a second series coming out next year. So I'm drafting out a second book for that series because the first book's already slated for publication in September. And that's kind of what I'm working on. I've always got a story in process, and I signed with a new agent a month ago, so we'll be working on another book that I've already drafted and getting that out, hopefully into the world. So I have lots of books always at my fingertips I'm working on. So
it sounds like it. The way that writing and publishing works, writers seem to always be either like working, drafting, editing, promoting, doing all of these things. I just sometimes wonder, do you ever get things confused, like which story you're talking about?
I try. I don't usually work on them at the exact same time, so usually I'm pretty good. And I also have this habit, like whatever I'm working on, I try to read several chapters before I move myself into it, so I'm always grounded in the story that I'm working on. But that is a fear sometimes when I think about, like even next year having 2 books to launch, it's like, oh my goodness, this is going to be a juggling act, but I'm up for the challenge. I love to write and I love storytelling. That's ultimately the joy of it for me, is just getting into the characters and watching them grow and being part of that process of creating. That's my happy place. So.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of writing for publication, was that something that you always wanted to do? I know you set it aside for a while and came back to it, but was it something that you always wanted to do, or did you decide later in life? How did that work for you?
Yeah, so I was an avid reader. That's what I loved really doing as a kid. I never really talked about wanting to write or do anything like that. I was probably an average student in my English class. And nothing really. I thought, oh, I'm going to be the next novelist, great novelist. But I started working in the legal field when I was 18, right out of high school. And shortly after that, I found Mary Higgins Clark. And I really started to love mysteries right about that time in my early 20s. And it would take me until I was about 27 to decide, maybe I'd like to try writing a book. So I actually started writing at 27. And I would write for 8 years. I actually drafted 3 other novels prior to Derailed. Overnight success, right? It's like it takes a long time. Lots of books, and then I would write till 30, and then I wrote until I was about 35, and set the pen down about that point. But I always knew I'd come back to writing, though. Once I got the bug at 27, it's always been a part of me. Even though I kind of had to set it aside for 15 years just because I didn't have the bandwidth to do a brand new company and write, I always longed to get back. I'd look at my draft up in the closet thinking, and I'd bring it down once in a while, and I just want to come back to this. And I had to sell part of our company. My husband and I sold a part, and then I had the energy to come back to it, and I've been doing it ever since. I turned 56, so I've been doing it about 5.5 years now, and I don't see it slowing down.
Well, good. I'm glad that you found the space to be able to get back to that.
Yeah.
From your own experience, then, do you have advice for aspiring authors?
I think, just don't stop, really, at the end of the day. I mean, writing for publication is a whole other beast, but if you're aspiring to be an author, I think that the advice I would give to that is find community, keep doing your craft, and keep telling your stories, and you'll keep getting better. And that's really what you need to do if you're going to go for publication. If you're just an aspiring writer, I say, ignore what everybody else tells you. Just sit down and write, because finding the joy around the writing, even if you're going for publication, will sustain you for everything else, because publication really is its own beast. It has its ups and downs, and it's very slow process if you're going traditional, and that. But if you just want to write, I say just keep writing, keep getting better, take classes, and find people that are enjoying it as much as you are, because they become community, and that's kind of a really great aspect of the whole writing thing. Authors are lovely people. Writers are lovely people. And they're fun. And only writers understand writers. I've come to know that, Mm-hmm. All of our idiosyncrasies, all of our, feelings of inadequacies, writers totally get that.
Right.
And time for our third and final break of the podcast. When we come back, Mary will be talking about some of the writing communities that she is a part of. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. Together we dive into the world of sci-fi and science fiction. From episodes of Star Trek, Star Wars, to The Walking Dead, Resident Evil, all the hot new science fiction movies from the backdoors of Marvel or DC. The Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. You'll never look at science fiction the same way again.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and the conclusion of my interview with author Mary Keliikoa.
Do you have writing communities that you're a part of?
I do. I'm actually, so when I came back, I forgot to mention this part, but in 2016, when I came back to writing, I actually had gone into the Pitch Wars program. And I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's a mentoring program. Mm-hmm. And I was a Pitch Wars mentee in 2016. So I'm a very, integral part of the process. I love my Pitch Wars community. And in fact, this year I'm mentoring. I'm paying it forward, and I'll be mentoring for the 21-22 Pitch Wars year. And I'm very excited for that. So that's kind of my biggest one. And then, of course, Mystery Writers of America. I'm a vice president of my local chapter of Sisters in Crime. I belong to Willamette Writers. So I really stay connected with the mystery writing community in particular. And yeah, so and then of course I have lots of friends that are published authors now, and we're critique partners for each other. And, so, it's over time, you just continue to meet people and they become good friends.
Yeah. May I ask who your Pitch Wars mentor was?
Yeah, Kelly Garrett and Sarah Henning were my two Pitch Wars. I had two of them. I was lucky enough to have two.
That's awesome. And Kelly's been on the podcast, and I'm always amazed at how many, you're, I think, the second or third mentee that I've now talked to. So that's awesome.
Yeah, she has a good track record. She's an awesome mentor.
And I think it was just her birthday. Anyway.
Yes, and she's got a new book coming out next year, so she's a busy lady.
You mentioned Sue Grafton and Mary Higgins Clark as two authors that you read. What other authors and genres do you turn to when you read for yourself?
Yeah, I'm very solid in the mystery, suspense, thriller category. I love probably the stuff I really is part of my history would be like Faye Kellerman and Janet Ivanovich. I love John Grisham, and Michael Connelly. And then, of course, now there are so many, new authors that I love, Kelly Garrett, of course, and Heather Chavez with the thrillers, and Diane Freeman is a historical, and Heather Heaston, Heather Redmond, so I really don't have favorites. I read everything that I can get my hands on, but it is always steeped in mystery, suspense, and thriller. That's what I love to read. It's what I enjoy. And really, when you think about it, so many genres always have a mystery in them, even the love story, right? But I enjoy that kind of puzzle of trying to figure out who done it. That keeps my brain busy, and I like that.
Mm-hmm. Do you veer more toward cozy mysteries? Do you like thrillers? Do you like them all? Where on the spectrum do you lie, do you think?
I'm kind of that middle of the road traditional mystery. I do enjoy cozies to some degree, but I tend to gravitate more towards that PI detective type of feel, that methodical sort of way of going about solving the crime. I don't read serial killer stuff. I did when I was younger, but I don't do it now. I don't sleep as well when I do. So as long as the thriller doesn't go down that road of being hunted by a killer, a serial killer in particular, I read it. I just kind of read everything, but I guess more traditional, more that middle lane is where I stick.
Mm-hmm. And your series is not a cozy mystery series, but it does have a dog. So just, for people out there.
It has Floyd, yes.
Yeah.
It's not quite cozy, but a little.
Right. Is he based on any pets you've had?
He's actually, we fostered a basset hound many, many, many years ago, and he's based loosely on him. His name was Floyd, and he was just a clown. And we only had him for a month. We were kind of that home in between. And, so he's based on that. But my day job is in the pet industry. I owned a natural pet store. That's part of the business we sold and that. And so I love dogs and cats and all things furry. So I'm not as big on the reptiles, but give me a furry critter and I'm all about it. So I love the idea of having Kelly having a sidekick. Floyd just works really well with her. And of course he has an active role in Denied. So it was really fun to bring him to life.
Yeah. Character development for they need character development too.
That's right. You can't always just be riding shotgun.
That's right. I know you have a website, so if you can tell people the website as well as any social media that people can interact with you on.
Yeah. My website is just www, of course, marykeliikoa.com. So it's MaryKeliikoa.com. And that's always the best way to catch up with me. You can sign up for my newsletter, get a little short story. I send out something monthly, usually do giveaways. It's a fun way to keep in contact. But of course, I'm on all the social media channels, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. I just put my toe into TikTok, but I'm not sure I'm going to keep it there. It's a little bit, I don't know, me and technology, but I'm
it's
solid
daunting.
in Facebook.
I hear you.
But my website, and there's all my links are at website too, so you can always click into the social media channels from that as well.
Okay, thank you. Mary, we've talked about a variety of different things, but is there anything that we haven't covered that you were hoping to talk about during our time together?
No, I think we've covered it all for Kelly. I think Kelly Pruitt is definitely worth picking up the book for. I don't know if I mentioned this, but Derailed was book one. It was a Seamus finalist for the 2020 season, and it was nominated for a Lefty, Agatha, and an Anthony Award. For Best First Novel. So that was quite a thrilling year. Book two follows up, and I'm even being told by reviewers that they like it even better than the first one. So I'll take that high praise. It's exciting. And and book three will be out in May of 2022, and it is called Deceived.
Okay. And as you were speaking, it popped into my head. Are there audiobooks, or will there be audiobooks?
At this point, there is not. There is not an audiobook deal on this series yet.
All right. Sounds good. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me about Kelly and the series, and especially the newest book, Denied. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It's been very fun to be here.
Thank you once again to Mary for talking to me about Denied, the second in her Kelly Pruitt mystery. I am looking forward to more Kelly Pruitt stories, looking forward to seeing how her character develops, how her relationships develop, because there was definitely some forward progress made in a couple of areas in relationships in this book. Interested to see to learn more about her daughter Mitz and Floyd, of course. I really, I hope nothing happens to the dog because, he's my fictional dog crush right now, and I need Floyd to be okay. At any rate, thank you to Mary for joining me. If you are a fan of crime fiction, if you are a fan of female PIs, you should definitely check out Denied. But you should also, just check out the series in general. The first one, as Mary said, is called Derailed. So Derailed and Denied. If you want to check those out, you should definitely. I like what the back of the book says. When it says Denied is the second book in the gripping Kelly Pruitt mystery series, but it says, if you like strong heroines, off-the-charts tension, and breathtaking twists, then you'll love Mary Keliikoa's action-packed stories. So yeah, if you're looking for a good read that has lots of twists and turns, has a good, strong female lead character, and has a basset hound, then definitely check this book out. And thank you again so much for joining me for this episode. As always, if you're a fan of this podcast, you know what's coming. Follow me on social media. Well, not follow me. Follow the podcast. Follow the podcast on social media. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Would love to hear from you. Tell me what you're reading. Ask questions. Tell me what authors you're enjoying, what author interviews you have really liked. Just, interact with me. Tell me what's going on in your life. Also, if you could take a minute to leave a review for the podcast, that would be awesome. It doesn't have to be a long review. It can be one sentence, or you can just leave a starred review depending on what platform you listen on. But leaving a review really, really does help us to get this podcast out to more listeners. I hope you're having a good week so far, and I hope you'll join me again on Friday for the next episode of the podcast. But in the meantime, I, as always, hope that your week has plenty of time for you to find yourself a good book and get lost in that good book. Thanks.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.